So and David Drake, as Tom mentioned, I am a professor and an extension wildlife specialist in the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology. So I'm on the wildlife side, and I have an extension appointment, as my title indicates. And a number of years ago, some friends and I wrote a paper that we published in the Journal of Extension about extension and comparing it to a modern day Pony Express. And this analogy will become more clear as we get into the presentation. But this is one of my most fun and interesting, to me, guest lectures. And I usually provide this guest lecture to a number of classes over the course of each academic year. And why I like it so much is because it talks about the history of land grants and extension. And we can't get to extension without talking about the history of land grants, which we're going to start with first. But this is, and then so it just so happened that the day I gave this guest lecture last month, Tom had sent an email out about something with land grants. I emailed Tom and said, hey, would you be interested in maybe having a presentation on land grant history? And so this is kind of how we've arranged this. I think this is my audition in front of Tom to see if I'm interested enough to maybe take this to a larger stage, I think. But anyway, we're going to talk about the foundation of land grant universities across the country. And to me, this is one of the least well-known but most impactful and most interesting stories in American history. And maybe you know some of this already, maybe you don't, but hopefully you'll learn something today. But I think that as you'll see, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand that these federal pieces of legislation radically changed higher education in the United States, and for good, I think. The other piece of legislation, as an aside, that people a lot of times point to as having a real shift in providing access to higher education is the GI Bill. And we're not going to talk about that today, but that's the other piece of legislation that a lot of people point to as being radical in terms of providing mass access for the public. All right, so we're going to refer to this triangle here, and I'm going to come back to it in the next slide in 2. But this is essentially what the Land Grant Institution is. And so, anybody know what the Land Grant Institution in Wisconsin is?
UW-Madison.
UW-Madison, yeah. And how about Minnesota? University of Minnesota, Michigan State, Iowa State, for some of the bordering states. Every state in the United States has at least one land grant university. It's split in New York between Cornell and State University of New York, and split in California. But other than that, I believe every other state in the union has only one land grant university in that state. The thing with land grant universities is that you have teaching and research similar to non-land grant universities. But what makes land grants unique is that third leg of the stool, extension. And that's where we're going to ultimately end up talking about today. But we have to kind of unravel some of this history before we get there. And I'll refer to this again in just a minute. So keep this triangle in mind. All right, so the very first piece of federal legislation that created the land grant university system was the Morrill Act of 1862. And this was introduced into Senate by Senator Justin Morrill, who was a senator from Vermont. But he was not the first person to actually bring this idea to the forefront. The first person of record likely is Jonathan Baldwin Turner, who was a professor in Illinois. And before Morrill brought this to the forefront and introduced it into Congress as a bill, Jonathan Baldwin Turner had written a treatise essentially about allowing access for the working class of American public into higher education. And so that was really the foundation for the Morrill Act of 1862. The Morrill Act had been introduced prior to being signed into law in 1862, and the previous president, James Buchanan, vetoed the law. He vetoed the act. James Buchanan, according to historians, has been ranked as, if not the worst president in the United States history, as one of the worst, and it's probably not a coincidence that he is one of the worst presidents in the United States history and vetoed the Morrill Act initially. Anybody know why, if you've been to Bascom Hill on campus, does anybody know why Abe Lincoln his statue is there in front of Bascom Hall? Where's Abe Lincoln? What state claims Abe Lincoln? Illinois. So what is he doing in Wisconsin?
I remember something about there's only 2 statues like that or something.
Well, the reason Abe Lincoln is in front of Bascom Hall because he was the president that signed the Morrill Act into law July 2nd, 1862, to create the land-grant university system. Okay, so he is there as a tribute to creating the land-grant university system, and because UW-Madison is the flagship for the land-grant in Wisconsin, that's the reason. All right, so the whole idea behind the Morrill Act of 1862 is that for every congressional representative each state had, so this is congressmen, I'm going to use congressman because at the time there were no congresswomen, but for every congressman and every senator every state had in the union at that time, they were granted 30,000 acres of land per congressional representative. So that's the land grant, okay? And with that, they were then tasked with creating on that land grant either the buildings for a public institution, a public university or college, and or they would take some of that land that they were granted and sell it to generate revenue in order to build the buildings, staff it with staff and faculty, and run a public university. Okay, so that's the land grants part of that. When Morrill first introduced the bill that got vetoed by Buchanan, it included agriculture and mechanical arts. Mechanical arts is just a term for engineering. Okay, but since then, keep in mind in 1862, the Civil War has been raging for about a year now. He introduced military strategy as one of the tenets, the three tenets for land-grant universities. Okay, and because of that, that's kind of what propelled the Morrill Act over the top to get actually signed into law, because they needed to train military people to fight the Civil War at that time. Yeah.
If you don't mind. After the Civil War, were the secessionist states grandfathered into this?
Well, that's a good point, and I'll get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
Yep, very good point. Okay, so as you mentioned, as you see here, agriculture, mechanical arts, and military strategy were the three focal areas for land-grant universities, okay? At the time, agriculture was very, very important to our GDP, to our gross economy, because we were an agrarian nation. As farmers farmed and made profit, our country as a whole did better. So the land-grant system was meant to teach agriculture for upcoming farmers. We had just come through the Industrial Revolution, right? So we are now into the combustible engine and machinery and things like that. That ended the Industrial Revolution in the United States was 1830s, 1840s. So we were at the beginning of really developing all these engineering tools to help us have better lives. So that's why engineering was in that. And then military strategy, again, because the Civil War was raging at that time. Now, if you look at land-grant universities, for example, I got my master's degree from Texas A&M, A for agriculture, M for mechanical arts. And so land-grant university systems typically have strong agricultural programs, and they have strong engineering programs, as we do here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. What is the remnant of military strategy? Anybody know that? How you would find that on campus?
ROTC.
ROTC, exactly. So that's the leftover part of military strategy, which we don't enhance or focus on all that much, but it still is a focal area on land-grant university campuses. Okay, so that was the essence of the Morrill Act of 1862, to create the original land-grant system. Now, we also have Morrill Act of 1890, and to me, the 1890 Act is almost even more impactful and more impressive than the 1862 Act is, because now we've come through the Civil War, but we're still a divided country. And this gets to your question here. So the Morrill Act of 1890 says, if you do now not allow Black citizens into your universities, you must create a separate but equal university system. And that's where we get the historically Black colleges and university system, okay? It's not a coincidence that most of those, almost all of those, are south of the Mason-Dixon line, because that's where we still had separation of races primarily in the South. And so you get Morehouse, Prairie View A&M, Agricultural and Mechanical Arts, Alabama A&M, other Hampton University, things like that. So that to me is a really impressive kind of foresight to create that kind of a historically Black college university system, which obviously now is still in place and is very vibrant college and university system. The last Morrill Act was of 1994, and that created the tribal college system. So we have 3 tribal colleges here in Wisconsin, for example, the Menominee College, Fond du Lac, and I forgot what the third one is.
Coudray.
What's that?
Coudray.
Coudray. Thank you very much. Yeah. So that was also a pretty impressive portion that they allowed the creation of higher education for groups that were not necessarily represented in white America. Okay, now.
What's with the 55-cent stamp?
Oh, that's just because it has Justin Morrill on it. So that's the senator from Vermont who created that.
Is that one we have out right now?
I don't know how recent that is. I just put it there as a tribute to Justin Morrill.
All right.
Now, here's where it gets a little messy and murky, as most of our American history does. Okay, so we had the land grant system where they granted 30,000 acres of land per congressional representative to every state. But some people term this the land grab, because a lot of those lands came from the indigenous population in the United States. Okay, the lands were taken from our native populations and given to the states. So that's why they call it the land grab. Depending on the state, between 90,000 and 990,000, so almost 1 million acres of land was granted to each state to create the land grant university system. Yeah, about 11 million acres of indigenous land was taken and given to the states, and the endowment relatively currently would have been about $23 million worth of land that was given. Okay, so this is where it gets a little messy here, and now land grant universities are starting to acknowledge that fact. And just I don't know, a couple of years, whether it's 2018, over in Bascom Hill, excuse me, they just put this plaque up to recognize that lands were taken from the Dejo nations to create the land grant system that we call UW-Madison. Okay, it's a start. I think that there's more to do here, and UW-Madison is continuing to try to acknowledge this and make amends for past reparations. But it's at least a start. But again, as with most of American history, it gets very, very muddy. Okay. All right. So now we've been moving along since 1862. Land grant universities have been established. As a matter of fact, the University of Wisconsin-Madison was established even before the Morrill Act was enacted. But now, again, we're an agrarian nation. So the better farmers do, the better we do as a nation economically. Okay. So then they realized that we need to really put a lot of focus onto agricultural research. So the Hatch Act of 1887 created agricultural experiment stations. And so agricultural experiment stations were meant to generate research into soils and entomology and crops and how do you use machinery better. So biological systems engineering, for example, and all those things to try to improve farming and to start concentrating some effort in terms of research to make farming more profitable, more efficient, more effective, and more productive. Now, Hatch Act, we still recognize Hatch Act of 1887 here on this campus, as do all campuses, all land grant campuses across the country. And we have Hatch money, which is federal money that comes to the University of Wisconsin each year. And here at Wisconsin, our College of Ag and Life Sciences will put out an email for a grant competition, which is essentially within our College of Ag and Life Sciences, that you can write a proposal, research proposal, and compete for Hatch money that is on campus to carry out research. Now, one of the things about that is that your proposal has to have an agricultural component. Okay, so for example, I am on my last year of a 4-year Hatch grant, and I'm looking at something in the urban environment because I study urban ecology, but I had a component where I'm comparing something in the urban to something in the rural. Okay, and that rural component qualifies me for the Hatch money because then we're focusing on something in the rural or in the agricultural lands. Now, one thing about Hatch money is it's formula funds to this day, and one of the variables in the formula that determines how much each state gets from that federal money is how many family farms you have in your state. So as the family farms have been declining in every state, that typically then what happens is each state gets less and less money the fewer family farms they have in the state. So this is unfortunate, and perhaps the formula needs to be revisited to kind of change that a little bit at the federal level, so that we can reflect the fact that we are having fewer and fewer family farms for a variety of reasons. But just know that the fewer family farms we have in the state, the less Hatch money that comes into our state that can be used for research and agricultural improvements and things like that. Okay, so that's the Hatch Act of 1887. We're plugging along now, and now they realize that we are generating all this wonderful research on these land-grant campuses. But for the most part, the research is being stuck on the campus. It's not getting out into the public where it belongs and where it could be needed and valued, okay? So now the last piece of legislation that is the piece of the puzzle here is the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. The Smith-Lever Act created the Cooperative Extension Service, okay? So every state has a Cooperative Extension Service. And typically what happens is that Cooperative Extension Service is based at the land-grant university. So you have specialists like myself, I'm considered an extension wildlife specialist, specialists at the land-grant university that are conducting research in some focal, some discipline such as wildlife, entomology, soils, whatever it is. And then that research and that knowledge is disseminated out amongst the state by county agents. And so it used to be when the Extension Service was flush with money, that every county in every single state had a county agent in the county office there, okay? So if you remember Green Acres, the sitcom about this couple that moves from the city out to a farmette, Hank Kimball, that gentleman you see facing the picture there with the hat on, he was kind of the bumbling county agent on Green Acres, but he was meant to help the Haneys learn how to farm. And so we had all these extension agents in the county, and that's how we disseminated information from off campus out throughout the state. Yeah, Tom.
Everybody was bumbling on Green Acres.
Everybody was bumbling, right? And that was the original Kim Kardashian. So yeah. Okay. So the whole idea behind the Smith-Lever Act is to disseminate information out and about the state and throughout the country, state by state by state. Okay. So the idea that it was to help farmers farm better. And again, the better farmers did, the better we did as a public, the better we did as an economy. Okay. Now, one thing I want to revisit really quick before we go on is if you remember that triangle. Okay. I want to come back to that really quick. One of the things that I think is really impactful about about the Morrill Act of 1862 and the land grant system is that prior to that, the only people that went to college were typically white, rich, and powerful, okay? And they were typically males. And most of the time at colleges, what was taught were the classics. So physics, chemistry, math, English, languages, history, things like that. One of the things that was so impactful about the Morrill Act is that it opened up this to the masses, so that you didn't have to be rich and powerful to go to college. You could it provided access to a broader section of the public. Okay, and it also then again reflected the changing times that we were studying agriculture, we were studying engineering and other sciences other than the classic sciences, and you see that reflected on land grant colleges across the country. That you still have these sciences that are in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences a lot of times. Okay, so that's what was so impactful about the Morrill Act is that it really provided access to a much broader swath of the public, and the things that we were actually learning about and teaching and then taking off campus out into the public was meant to improve individual, people's daily lives. And so that was one of the most wonderful things about that. And the Extension Service is, in its heyday, was one of the greatest institutions probably ever created because it was this awesome information dissemination service. There was a way you moved information off campus and out into the public to make people's lives better. Now, here's where we get to the title of this talk and comparing the Extension Service to Pony Express. So anybody remember when the Pony Express was active?
Yeah, I lived through it.
1860
to 1862.
It
Yeah.
was only for like 18 months.
Yeah.
Right just before the Civil War.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. It was about April 1860 to October 1862. Okay, so about 1861 to 1862. So I'm sorry, April 1860 to October 1861. So about 18 months. And believe it or not, at the time, this was the most efficient and the fastest way to move information across the country, is to put these wiry guys on a horse and run them halfway across the country from Missouri to the West Coast as fast as you possibly can. That was the most efficient way to transfer information at the time. Okay, and it worked very well for about a year and a half. It worked very, very well. Then we get into the telegraph and we get into the Transcontinental Railroad. And all of a sudden, overnight, the Pony Express just disappeared because there's more efficient and quicker ways to transfer information. With the telegraph, you can transfer it very quickly across the wires, okay? So you can get messages across. With the Transcontinental Railroad, you can get packages as well as people, as well as information, mail across the country very, very quickly. So all of a sudden, the Pony Express became very obsolete. And I'm going to make the argument now that the extension service, big E and little e, is becoming obsolete if it's not already for a variety of reasons. Starting off with changing US demographics, all right? We're going to start off with around 1900 or so. There were about 76 million people in the United States at the time. 60% of those resided in rural areas, so we're out in the country, most likely on farms. Only 7% of the country were high school graduates, okay? So not many people, we were not formally educated as a public or a people. 42% of the people were employed on 5.7 million farms. So not quite 50% of our country was employed on almost 6 million farms. So keep in mind that bottom line as I turn to the next slide here. Now, this is 2020, so a couple years ago. We have about 330 million people now in the country. 17% reside in rural areas. So flip that, about 85% of us live in urban areas. The vast majority of the public lives in cities and other urban type areas. 80% of us are high school graduates at least, if not college graduates. But 2%, okay, are employed on 2 million farms. So that is a drastic change in demography right there, and where people work and where they live. Okay, so keep that in mind as we talk about this. So extension's role today, we still have very, very strong ties to agriculture. Again, extension, we are, a lot of us in extension are based in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It doesn't matter if you go here, it doesn't matter if you go to another state, agriculture is prominently featured within the extension service, okay? And the question is, do farmers need extension these days? A lot of people who are farming are now educated themselves, either have college degrees, at least an undergraduate degree, if not an advanced degree in agriculture. We have the short course where we have kids coming off of farms who may not want to go to college, but they at least have exposure to information on a college campus when they can come to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a couple months of a period of time over the year, get a very intense exposure to things, all things agriculture related. But the other thing is, just about every farmer, especially if you're under the umbrella of a corporate farm, they have access to consultants. So soil consultants, crop consultants, consultants about how to run your machinery, how to fix your machinery. They've got consultants about yields, all sorts of different things. And farmers don't use extension very much anymore. It's not very often that the Haneys will go to Hank Kimball in the extension office and go, hey, Hank, I've got a problem with this, and Hank's going to solve the problem, okay? There are some crops, cranberry is a good example here in Wisconsin. Potato is a good example here in Wisconsin, where the commodity group and the extension personnel are pretty tightly tied together. But for row crops, I'm not sure that that's the case so much anymore, either in Wisconsin or any other state in the country, okay? So it's kind of curious to me that we continue as an extension service, continue to be tied tightly to agriculture when I'm not sure that we're terribly competitive. And again, I'm not talking about specific commodities like cranberry or potato, but across all agricultural commodities, I'm not sure that we're as competitive as we could be or as we think we might be. So what we argue in this paper here, when we're comparing extension to Pony Express, is that extension really is at a crossroads. And we've been at a crossroads for at least the last decade, if not more, because the extension budgets are dwindling. So we don't have as much money. We don't have people that are out there doing as much extension related activity. And the other question is extension relevant? Do people know about extension? And so that's what we kind of argue in this paper. And I want to kind of walk you through some of our discussion here. So one thing we talked about in this paper here, in terms of kind of thinking about how to strategically change the extension service or to be more competitive, is refine and redefine extension's niche. Remember, at the time when the land grants were created, there were three focal areas. It was agriculture, engineering, and military strategy. Now, if you go to AFRI, which is the Agriculture and Food Research Institute, which used to be Cooperative States Research Extension and Education Service, so which is that's what extension is under the umbrella of AFRI here, okay? If you go to the USDA page where extension is based, and you look at all the focal areas of extension, I think there's 23 program areas. All right, I've just listed some of them. I think there's either 23 or 26. And if you open up each program area, there are dozens sometimes sub-program areas. So the point of this is that we are trying to be everything to everybody. And we're doing a very, very poor job of providing relevant, timely information to a lot of different people because we're just spread so thin and we've really diluted ourselves. And so instead of trying to be everything to everybody, what we need to do is refine, kind of narrow our mission a little bit and figure out where can we be competitive and strategically start working our way in that direction. So what we're kind of suggesting along these lines here is maintain traditional ties where it makes sense. So, you know, again, in some agricultural sectors where extension has a really strong connection with the commodity group and the growers and the producers and things like that, it doesn't make any sense to cut those ties. But other areas where maybe extension is not being so competitive, for example, where we're not competing with some of the row crop farmers because they're using consultants and other industry people, why continue to compete against those types of people when we don't have a good foot in the door and we're wasting a lot of money doing that? We suggest developing more focused clientele. Again, 85% of the United States lives in urban areas. So why aren't we in urban areas with a stronger focus and a stronger emphasis and a stronger presence and actually work where people live, which makes more sense to us? The other thing is a market analysis. If you look at Fortune 500 companies or any company that wants to be competitive and profitable, they spend a lot of money on research into how do we market our product? Okay, what are we selling? How do we make that product better? How do we improve that product? They don't each year they're doing something to change either the product appearance, the product quality, whatever the case might be. It doesn't seem to me that we do that in extension. So some kind of a market analysis might be a very good idea to figure out where can we be competitive and maybe where do we need to start loosening ties and redirect some of those resources. Okay, I know it's not as easy as I make it sound because when we talk about resources, it's not only money, but it's people's lives. It's people who are working in extension offices and are doing things where maybe that job might go away. And I'm not saying that you fire people, but maybe when they retire, or if you can redirect them in other areas and put them in other areas and have them have another emphasis, maybe we should start thinking about doing something like that. Yeah.
The market analysis then, is that for the extension itself? It's not for products.
No, well, so it gets me to this next point. Extension is a very well kept secret, okay? And the other part is we need a product identity. So if I go out onto the street today and say, hey, could you tell me what extension does? They're going to go, what the hell are you talking about? Are you talking about an extension cord or extending? What are we extending? And I work in the extension service for the extension service. And my 30-second elevator speech is we help to make your lives better using research-based information. And it's free to you for the most part. So, but not many people have even heard of extension. So that's the part of what I'm talking about with the market analysis is let's figure out a tagline and let's figure out what the hell you're selling people. And when I say selling, we don't really sell it. We provide it as a free service for the most part, but what the hell are we providing? And this gets back to, we're trying to be everything to everybody and we can't do that. And we need some kind of a product identity, and product being information dissemination, but it's research-based information. Yeah.
I was just saying, you're much like a business that has lost its market. You're looking for new customers and you got to develop new products.
Yeah.
And I was thinking this whole extension thing, land grant, was really part of a program for the federal government to settle the West before other countries. And I think myself, the Civil War was kind of an interruption in that, because right after the Civil War, the railroads came in and we encouraged so much immigration We had to settle those lands before someone else got them, and we had to make sure that people were knowledgeable, could make a living. And I think the Homestead Act was in there too, wasn't it?
Yeah, so that was all part
Yeah.
of that, for
But it
sure.
made a lot
Yeah.
of that possible.
Yeah, it did, except keep in mind the extension, essentially the extension service was created with the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. So we're talking about almost 75 years after the Civil War ended and after the Transcontinental Railroad.
Well,
So-
that was prior to the war, 20s.
Yeah,
And all the wheat exports.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
World War
yep, absolutely. But that, all that was the culmination
Yeah,
of,
the roads yet, the
Yep.
oil industry was starting.
yep, that was all the culmination
So
of
you're really part of a good big picture.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But so the problem right now is extensions are pretty well kept secret. Not many people know about extension, okay? And we're not doing ourselves any favors by not advertising it. Increase our visibility and build a strong constituency. This is part of the problem with trying to be everything to everybody, is you have a few people over here who will advocate for you and a few people over here advocate for you, but the constituency is so diluted across the board that we don't have a strong advocation when things happen for extension to publicize and to motivate and to build momentum to support extension. And I'll give you an example of this. Back when, I think it was George W. Bush, in one year, one of his budget years, he proposed in the first year to cut the hatch funding by 50%. And the second year, if I recall this correctly, he was going to eliminate hatch funding altogether. Okay, so in over a 2-year period, he was going to completely eliminate hatch funding. If we had, and he never did, thankfully he never did, but if we had a strong constituency base, he never ever would have even thought about proposing that in the budget. Okay, because he would have known that he's going to get such pushback from the voters that it's not worth the risk of doing that. But the fact that he felt emboldened enough to put that reduction and then elimination of the Hatch Act into the federal budget gives you an indication that there's not a strong constituency out there that's going to threaten him from doing that. Okay. Now, a couple other things to think about is information transfer. So again, extension, the beauty of the extension service when it was created and through the 1900s and even through the 1900s was that it was this awesome information transformation system, or just information transfer system. Okay. Well, one of the things we do now, and I'm guilty of this as well, we write fact sheets, and so we'll write a 2 to 4, 6, 8 page publication that is a lay publication geared toward the public to provide information. And so the fact sheets I write are on wildlife damage management. So if you have problems with rabbits in your garden, what would you do about that? Okay. And nowadays we are in, especially the younger generation, on the phone. You know, one of the reasons Twitter is so popular is because it only takes you 10 seconds to digest what you're reading. Instagram, TikTok, all of that is really short sound bites, and they're transferring some information. It's not always good information, but they're transferring information. So who the hell is going to sit down and read a 4-page fact sheet to figure out what to do about rabbits when I can look online and figure out just like that? And you know everything online is true, right? But here's what the problem is we are competing with this thing that is called Google. You just type something into Google and you've got your answer just like that. And extension, a lot of times, isn't at the top of the search engine. So we are way down here for one thing. And if people get to our product, it's 2 pages long and it's like, holy crap, who wants to read that? And the other part of the problem right now, in my opinion, is a lot of what we offer is free because tax dollars are already being paid to support extensions. So a lot of times there are legalities where it kind of dictates what we can charge for and what we cannot charge for an extension. But in today's thought process, a lot of times, if you get something for free, the thought is, well, it must not be very good because they're giving it away for free. Okay. And I think that hurts us when we're giving stuff away through the extension service for free. People go, well, it must not be that good. What's the value of that if they're giving it away for free? So why not see if we can attach some kind of a charge? And again, it doesn't have to be a prohibitive charge. And if people can't afford it, we should figure out ways that we can provide the access information to them anyway. But we really need to think about how are we moving information out to the public to keep up with the changing and current times. So who are we reaching? Okay. We're not reaching a lot of the young people. 4-H was the preeminent young person program that Extension offered. And it was meant to help young people learn how to farm and learn about agriculture, to keep them in the agricultural business so they would take over the family farm and you would have generational farming going on, okay? 4-H is still prominently featured in Extension, and depending on where you are and what state or what county, they are transforming the 4-H program to reflect more urban trends and urban focus, but it's still primarily an agricultural focused program. And again, if only 15% of your public is living in rural areas and 2% are living on farms, why the hell are we spending so much time and money on that? It just, again, I should have said this up front. This is all my opinion. Okay, so take that with a grain of salt, and I might get my pink slip because I'm in the Extension and I'm talking about this, but take this with a grain of salt. The other question is not only who we're reaching, but how many people are we reaching? Of 330 million people around the world, well, not the world, but in the country, how many people are we reaching that we're actually impacting their lives and we're building a constituent base with that? A couple other things to think about is personnel. So, Scott Craven, one of the reasons I moved to Wisconsin and competed for the job I have as an extension wildlife specialist was the opportunity to work with Scott, because Scott was a colleague of mine. I was at Rutgers University and I came here. I really enjoyed working with Scott. Still have a very strong friendship with him, and talk to him regularly, things like that. But Scott retired 10 years ago, maybe. We have not, and we never will replace his position, ever. When I retire, I doubt that they will replace my position with an extension component. It will be all research and teaching. Okay, so we are not building bench depth. We're not replacing people in the extension system, partly because of budget constraints. Okay, but that's part of the problem. But the other issue is we're not relevant. If we were relevant, people would argue that, hey, we want you to replace that person. We'll help you fund that position. We'll figure out ways to support you so that you can refund that position. We're not seeing that. And as a matter of fact, not only in Wisconsin, but many other states, is that, and this is not necessarily a bad thing, but instead of having extension presidents in every county, we're going to multi-counties now. Okay, so we have sometimes extension presidents in every county, depending on what the position is, but some positions they might be overseeing 4 counties, and so it all depends on what's going on. But we don't have a lot of bench depth, and we're not replacing extension people as they retire. So the other thing we talk about in this paper is that we should have a natural resource focus. So for example, and we do have a natural resource focus, but let me give you an example. In wildlife, free-ranging wildlife is a public trust resource, okay? And you cannot, with rare exceptions of fur bearers, you can trap beaver and sell the pelt of beaver, although you're not gonna get much money for it these days compared to 30 years ago. But you cannot sell wildlife. Free-ranging wildlife is not a market resource. Okay, and because of that, there are not a lot of people out there who are throwing elbows to get a slice of the wildlife market, because there's no wildlife market. This is a perfect example where Extension could step in and have a very, very strong focus on wildlife, because we're not competing with consultants who are getting paid to do that. So in those types of areas, why not focus more on areas where we can be competitive, because there's not a lot of people throwing elbows in that focal area. Again, we would argue that there's more need for an urban focus. Okay, so in urban counties, extension personnel, they have nutritional science people to help people eat better, which is really smart. They've got people who focus on economics to help you, balance your checkbook, how to understand how to save money, which is, again, very, very smart. But other than that, we don't have a tremendous amount of urban focus amongst extension personnel. 85% of the United States lives in urban areas. So if you want to be competitive, and if you want to build a constituency base, you've got to be where the people are. And was it Jesse James? Somebody said, well, why do you rob banks? He goes, well, that's where the money is, right? So why the heck are we not in the urban area more than we are? And then, as I mentioned, we have no bench depth. So we're not replacing people as they retire. simply because of budget constraints, but also because the constituency base out there is not clamoring and putting pressure on the extension service to say, hey, this person is really relevant. They're really impacting my life in some positive way, and we need this position to be replaced. I'm not sure what happened up there. There we go. Okay. The other thing we're going to talk quickly. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Financial resources, wouldn't that be in competition with the Department of Natural Resources?
Not necessarily. I mean, it could be, but for the DNR, for example, if you look at what they do, and this is not just unique to our Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, they still have a very rural focus. They are, they make a lot of money off of license revenue for hunting and fishing and trapping. And so that's their constituent base. And most of the people are doing that kind of activity in non-urban type areas. So there's not, the DNR has very, very little presence in urban areas across the state. And most DNRs or most state wildlife agencies outside of Wisconsin also have very, very little urban presence and effort in cities. And so that would be an example. The other issue is with the DNR, for example, they have game biologists, so people who are focusing on species you can harvest, and we have non-game biologists. There's not as much resource directed at the non-game part of this. So, there are areas where I think we could kind of carve out the pie to figure out who's going to take what section. And we can also work collaboratively. We do now, but we could do even more of that as well. Yep, that's a good question. Okay, funding. Budgets are very, very tight, and budgets have been declining at least for the last 5 years, if not longer. So we need to get creative about how we're going to spend money. We need to be strategic about how we're going to do that. Okay, and again, why are we competing with crop consultants if we're not being competitive? Why are we competing with Google if we can't be competitive? So let's figure out where we need to maybe reduce the flow of resources and put those resources someplace else, especially as budgets get tight. We talked about this a little bit, but where we possibly can do it, we should be charging for our service. We should be charging for the information we provide, either by going out as we do public presentations like this. I'm guessing that each of you could afford $5 to come to this, possibly. That would go into a revenue generating account, for example. Okay, $5 is not outrageous. And it also, if people pay $5, I can't tell you how many times I might drive 2 hours to an event that where their reservations are not required to attend the event. It was just a walk-in, come if you want to. I drive 2 hours up there and there's 7 people in the event. Okay, now it doesn't make much of an argument that I'm relevant. Maybe I'm not that relevant, which is possible. But if people paid $5, they're going to likely show up versus saying, oh yeah, I might go, but then all of a sudden it's free and they're like, well, I've got something else going on. But if you pay money, then you expect something and you're going to show up for that. And so we could generate some more money than we do. Think about other creative funding mechanisms. So, and I know some of my extension colleagues are doing this where they have commodity-based resources they're working with, and where they are getting paid not as a consultant, but they're teaming up, and there's some kind of a, well, I'm not saying some type of, there is a collaborative funding mechanism going on where the extension personnel are getting paid either to conduct research, to disseminate that information, hold agricultural crop days, whatever the case might be. So we need to think about more of those collaborative funding mechanisms with industry, commodity groups, and other people. And again, I'm not suggesting that we are so expensive that people can't afford it or anything like that. And again, I'm not suggesting that if you can't afford it, you should be prevented from receiving that information. By no stretch am I suggesting that. We can figure out some kind of creative mechanism where we can make money, but we can also provide cost-efficient service and information. And I think more and more networking. Again, we need to do more collaborative networking with industry and commodity groups and things like that more than I think we do. All right, so that is the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. I'll just leave you with this quickly. I grew up in my professional life, I grew up in the extension service. So I've even graduate school, I worked in the extension cooperative extension service. I am a huge believer of extension. I think in its heyday, it was one of the greatest institutions ever created in the world by far. And the amount of impact that the extension service has had on American lives and lives around the world is almost immeasurable, because it has been such an impactful, productive, and wonderful organization. And I don't say this to be critical of what I talked about today in the presentation, as much as trying to keep this extension institution alive. Because if we don't, we are going to just continue to decline, and we're going to be like a dinosaur that all of a sudden we're just going to die this slow death. And I would hate to see that happen to extension. Yeah.
So in my mind, there's a little disconnect I'm not quite clear on.
Okay.
With what you were talking about. What I think really at the core of it is a question of value. And you know, that right now, but what I'm wondering is the issue of it that there's a need to better market what value you have, or is there a need to create something that will continue to be of value? Because I kind of heard you hitting both sides of that, and I'm curious to hear from you. You know, do you think the issue is that the extension really no longer has the value it once had, and that's why it's fading? So let's go out and find something to be of value, go into urban farming or something. Or is the issue that you really still have things of value, but in today's world, the transmission of that information isn't happening in a way that people recognize?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that question and for allowing me to clarify this. Extension has great value. Everything we do, we have great value, because again, extension is a research-based information source. Okay, so we are bringing the most current, relevant research to bear to answer questions that impact people's lives every day in some positive way. So extension has great value, and even these programs where we can't, in my opinion, compete with outside sources like crop consultants or Google, we still have outstanding value. We just don't get it out to the right people, or enough people, or people just don't realize that they should turn to extension for, you know, understand what insect is this, or turn to extension for, well, how do I go about, you know, balancing my checkbook, or whatever the case might be. And so that's what I think is we have outstanding value, but we're just a very, very well-kept secret. And that value is a well-kept secret. Yeah.
But I think extension, I worked in extension a number of years. I think extension needs to back up and get to its primary importance, and that is, what food does the human body need? Potato growers selling stuff to potato chip companies, is that of value? Corn used for ethanol, is that of value to the human being? We need to talk more about nutrition and the need for diet for the human body. And then how does agriculture produce that? And look at the stores. My God, you go down the cereal aisle, for example. 5 different shelves and then up so high you can't even reach it. In fact, I've even tried to climb because the only nutritious one was on the top shelf. Junk food, non-nutritious junk, high sugar. I can see extension personnel working with low-income people, let's say in some of the subsidized housing apartments, gathered people together in groups like we do in extension, or did. Strange, you know. But teach leaders nutrition, money management, child development, that sort of stuff. Big classes, have those people lead other people.
Yeah, I think some of that is all market driven, right? So it's what people are willing to buy. It's also how companies market products to make us think that we need the products as well. But so you know, I think again, extension it would be foolish to compete against an ADM, for example, or a Monsanto or something like that, because we should pick our battles. But I do agree with you that one of the extension roles could be nutritional sciences. And I will give you an example of how extension, at least in our state, is working that. If you go to Milwaukee, there's this awesome urban agriculture program going on where they're teaching people how to farm in urban areas to eradicate food deserts, to grow low cost or no cost nutritional foods. And then they're teaching them how to harvest that, and then how to cook with that. So they're developing recipes and teaching people how to do all that. They're teaching people about economics and these urban areas and low income areas and things like that. They're looking at community economic development. And so I think extension is doing that, but my concern is how many people are aware of that. And there's other people out there doing this. If you look at just urban agriculture, look at all the urban farms that are around the country. Somehow extension has to kind of put the flag on the moon and say, this is the ground we're staking here. And how do we fit into that and understand how to be competitive in that marketplace or in that niche?
Are there any counties holding their own in extension and in dairy agents and farm management agents?
Yeah, I don't know like the county by county specifics. Yes, I'm sure there are. In every county typically still has an agricultural agent. That agent works with dairy growers or cattle producers or whatever the case is. So there are, and there's also extension has agreements with each county where the county has to provide space, or they provide some funding to support the extension model in that county. So clearly there's they see the need for that and the relevancy of that. The county does. But again, I think it's hard to look at this because it's such a large extension, such a large group. It's almost hard to look at from a county to county basis, but that may be what is necessary at some point, is to figure out strategically, well, what counties should we be in? What counties do we maybe need to lessen our presence? But yes, some counties are doing very, very well, and other counties, extension may not be as relevant as they are in neighboring counties. Yeah.
Has the extension service ever been involved in trying to get farmers to form cooperatives to give themselves more leverage against the corporate behemoths?
I don't know the answer to that. I would assume so, but I don't know the answer to that. I know that when I was out east in North Carolina, for example, that the extension service was looking at forestry cooperatives to work with private forest landowners to get them together as a cooperative, so they had more market leverage when they would harvest their timber and bring the timber to the mill, for example. I'm assuming they do that on the ag side too, but I don't have any relevant examples to point to. But that's a good question. Yeah.
So I got an example of a project where extension provided very good information. So this is a relative of my wife's that was a dairy farmer and needed some additional income, and decided she's going to grow black currants, and she started with extension, and she got some help. And within no time at all, just a few years, she got the whole farm built up with a pretty good production. But the thing that was missing was the marketing side. So black currants is a sort of new crop in this country. I'm sure you could press the juice and sell it, to Russia for pennies, because it's a difficult market to compete in with the cost structure we have here.
I don't think we were selling anything to Russia today.
Yeah, but nobody worked with her to develop any kind of models.
Yeah.
How big of a farm does she have? How big does she have to be able to buy a harvesting machine, for example? And there were all sorts of missing things.
Yeah.
And I think this farm is slowly being taken over by weeds right now.
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it is understanding how do you help people. But then if you look at the cranberries, for example, they are breeding cranberries in the extension service. We're working on cranberry breeding. They're working on how to grow them better, how to market and things like that. But then you also have Ocean Spray, which is this big cranberry cooperative. And so Ocean Spray, this is a good example where extension and the industry kind of, collaborate. Ocean Spray handles the marketing side. They handle the business side because they've got, they need to advertise and market those products. Cranberry juice, craisins, and all sorts of things like that. And perhaps the currents will get there, but it's just such a new crop that they haven't evolved enough to develop that marketing niche. Yeah.
Does the inspection work with high schools or even grade schools to get the message out? What kind of research and what kind of information extension has?
Yeah, I don't know that they do it as a service, like as an institution. But for example, I will go into, I was just at Milton High School a couple of weeks ago talking about one of my extension/research projects. So individual extension personnel do go into K through 12 schools and talk about, whatever the topic is that has been requested to talk about. So we do that, yes, but I don't know that extension as an institution does that necessarily. We don't have a K through 12 presence per
Would there
se.
be a way to get the message out to people? I mean, you have high school kids that eventually are going to become adults in society.
Yeah.
If they know that their rain garden, their garden and the making chickens that they want to raise or whatever else, they might use the extension to learn about.
Yeah.
They know it's there.
Yep.
'Cause I don't know what the extension does other than just a few things that
Yeah.
I've learned along the years.
Yep. Yeah, that'd be a good example. I mean, our county extension agents here, Dane County Extension Service, the office is phenomenal. And what they do is just absolutely incredible. And they have people that come through there for programming and things like that. And I think everything they do, I'm a huge fan of, and I think they do a great job. It's just how many people know about them. Yeah.
I was going to say, several years ago, every school in Wisconsin in an agricultural area, you had a vocational instructor who taught woodworking,
Yeah.
crafts.
Yep.
You had an agricultural teacher, was an FFA and 4-H. You had a home economist.
Yep.
Who taught, and that's all gone because there's no market for that
Yeah.
anymore.
Right. Yep. That's a good
So
example.
much has to start with the family.
Yeah. Well, that it does. And again, FFA, with an urban population, that is just not something that people go into anymore, as in mass. So again, I think, the whole argument here is that we need to reflect the changing times and meet those changing times and help people where they live.
Yeah, I mean, you're left with the farmers market groups.
Yep.
And not a great deal more, the organic farming.
Yep. But look at how popular the Dane County market is here on the square. I mean, people, they crave that farm to table food, for example, and the locavores and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not that people don't want it. That's not what I'm arguing at all. I'm arguing the extension is helping to provide that. But if you say, hey, do you know what extension did to help you eat that cucumber? People are going, well, what the hell are you talking about?
But to meet people with incomes to support that.
Yeah.
But again, it kind of gets to the thing I was saying, you said in your thing, 2% of the population are the people actually living on farms. So I think if there's any relevancy, then you have to change what you provide. And when you say there's no role for FFA, I would disagree. You mentioned about the urban farming program going on in Milwaukee. And I think what you guys have to do is, like you said earlier, something about if you charge $5 for this, I'll be honest, I wouldn't have come.
You wouldn't have?
No.
Yeah, okay.
Because I don't know what it is,
Yeah.
but, you have to deal with the demographics we have now and, change the concept of FFA, and 4-H has done a fantastic job of becoming very relevant to more urban
Yep.
and, people of different backgrounds.
Some places they have, yeah.
Yeah, they've done a great job here in Madison.
Yeah.
And as an organization, they're like working on that. And that's kind of the thing. I think all the stuff you've talked about that are really strong programs will continue to be, but it's for a very narrow
Yep.
slice. And if, and if your goal, and I mean, I get it, it's for the extension to continue, it has to say, if a majority of people live in an urban area, let's teach people how to garden in their backyard.
Yep.
And then
And-
really promote it.
Yes, and
Get
there
a
are a
good
lot,
webmaster.
I mean, that's what Lisa Johnson and her colleagues at the Dane County Extension Office do. They do that. But if you think about how many people are gardening and how many people live in the county relative to how many people go through her office, it's not that many people that go through her office.
But nobody needs to go through the office anymore. You just, because I don't shop in person anywhere anymore.
I'm not saying,
I
I'm not saying physically
Oh,
go
okay.
through the office, but I mean, like how many touch points or contact points does Lisa have with the entire county?
But see, you can create that. You can create that. Get someone on Reddit, get someone doing Instagram,
Yep.
get people Twittering, create a really good website, because most of the ones I've
Yep.
seen from government suck. And I'm talking as an ex-IT person
Yeah.
who worked for the state government, would
And
do a terrible
I
job.
totally agree with everything you're saying. The problem is, it gets back to the bench step. Lisa, there's one Lisa, and she could use 5 other people
Yes,
to do all of that.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying
get
is,
interns.
or somebody, but
Yeah.
why not flow resources where you could build programming and you could build value and build
And I
product
agree,
identity
absolutely.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I am not disparaging extension. I think extension is awesome. And I think the idea behind extension is awesome. I would like to see it flourish and become very competitive and really, like if you need information, especially research-based information in area A, B, and C, extension is the first thing you think about.
Again, I like extension too. However, I wonder what role did extension play in identifying the antibiotics in chicken, for example? And what role did extension play in leading to food labeling? I think they didn't have a terribly active role until people began to understand antibiotics in chicken is not a very good idea. And whatever is in this food that I'm buying. I remember years ago when the processed foods began to hit the market. I would pick up a package and think, what's in it?
Yeah,
How can I serve this if I don't know what's in it?
yeah. Yeah, I don't know what extension's role in specifically chicken antibiotics and things like that were. Maybe they had a role, I just may not be aware of it. So that's a good point, though. How about one more question? I think I need to get going. I know I have to get going, but any other questions about anything? All right, thank you so much.